Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into one of the most shocking turns in the war that has left Russia scrambling for answers and Vladimir Putin forced to look beyond his borders for support. What we are witnessing right now is the slow but steady erosion of Russia's military strength in Ukraine, an erosion so devastating that Putin has been left with no choice but to crawl to Belarus for help. This is not the picture of strength that the Kremlin has tried to project to the world, but rather the portrait of a nation bled dry of men, equipment, and morale. For months, Ukraine has been relentless in targeting Russia's logistics, ammunition depots, air defenses, and naval forces. The result has been catastrophic for Moscow's war machine. What was once touted as one of the world's most powerful armies has been stripped down to the bones. Tank losses have been staggering, with Ukraine consistently reporting successful ambushes, drone strikes, and precision-guided missile attacks that reduce Russian armored columns to smoldering wreckage. These losses are not just symbolic. They cripple Russia's ability to advance on the battlefield. It is not just tanks. Russia's once formidable air force has been weakened to the point of near paralysis. Advanced aircraft like the Su-34 and Su-35, which were meant to dominate Ukrainian skies, have instead been turned into flaming wrecks after being shot down by Ukraine's Western supplied air defense systems. Every time Russia tries to mount an aerial offensive, Ukraine responds with Stingers, Patriots, and Iris-D systems, creating what some analysts have described as a lethal umbrella that Russian pilots fear to fly into. The Black Sea has also turned into a nightmare for Moscow. Ukraine's use of sea drones and Western supplied cruise missiles has devastated Russia's Black Sea fleet. The once proud fleet, which was supposed to control maritime dominance in the region, has instead been reduced to hiding in ports or fleeing further east to avoid being sunk. The destruction of Russian warships, including flagships and critical logistical vessels, has stripped Russia of its ability to project power across the Black Sea. This humiliation has not only weakened Moscow militarily, but also politically, as even its allies can see the steady collapse of its prestige. Ukraine has also been methodical in targeting ammunition, depots, and fuel supplies. With advanced HIMARS systems and British-supplied Storm Shadow missiles, Ukrainian forces have struck deep into Russian-held territory, wiping out stockpiles that Moscow desperately needs to sustain its war. Without adequate supplies of artillery shells, missiles, and fuel, Russian offensives stall before they can even begin. Soldiers are left undersupplied, demoralized, and vulnerable to counterattacks. These strikes have effectively starved Russia's front lines of the very lifeline they require to continue fighting. Casualties have further eroded Russia's ability to fight. Estimates suggest that hundreds of thousands of Russian soldiers have been killed or wounded since the invasion began. Many of these men were poorly trained conscripts or prisoners sent to the front lines with little preparation. The losses have left deep scars across Russian society, with entire towns losing significant portions of their male population. And as the coffins return home, the myth of an invincible Russian army is shattered. It is against this backdrop that Putin has turned desperately to Belarus. Once seen as the junior partner in their alliance, Belarus under Alexander Lukashenko is now positioned as a lifeline for the Kremlin. Russia seeks access to Belarusian military infrastructure, training grounds, and possibly even manpower to replenish its exhausted ranks. But make no mistake, this is not a position of strength. It is one of desperation. For Putin to rely on Belarus in this way is an admission that Russia's once vast reserves have been drained by Ukraine's tenacity and Western support. Belarus, however, faces its own challenges. The Belarusian army is small and lacks combat experience. While Lukashenko has allowed his territory to be used for staging Russian operations, he has been hesitant to fully commit his forces to the front lines. Entering the war directly would risk destabilizing his already fragile rule, as Belarusian citizens have shown little appetite for fighting Moscow's war. Lukashenko understands that his survival depends on balancing loyalty to Putin with the growing discontent within his own borders. What makes this situation even more embarrassing for Russia is that Ukraine continues to operate with increasing confidence and precision. Every drone strike on Russian soil, every attack on critical infrastructure sends a message. Ukraine is no longer simply defending, it is actively dismantling Russia's ability to wage war. And the fact that Putin now seeks help from a much smaller and weaker ally underscores how far the mighty have fallen. Russia's reliance on Belarus also highlights the isolation it faces on the global stage. Once Moscow counted on a network of partners and influence, stretching from Central Asia to Africa, now many of those relationships are strained. Even countries that have not outright condemned Russia's invasion are reluctant to provide meaningful support, wary of Western sanctions and the reputational damage that comes with being tied to a losing war. Putin's outreach to Belarus, therefore, is less about forging strength and more about clinging to the last scraps of regional support available. Meanwhile, Ukraine's resilience has been fueled by consistent Western aid, the flow of weapons, ammunition, training, and intelligence has given Kiev an edge that few could have imagined at the start of the invasion. NATO unity has remained strong, and each new delivery of advanced systems, from tanks to drones to long-range missiles, adds another layer to Ukraine's ability to dismantle Russia's military capacity. While Moscow scrambles for allies, Kiev is solidifying partnerships that ensure its survival and strengthen its long-term position. Putin's predicament is not just about battlefield losses. It is about perception. Strongmen rely on the illusion of control and invincibility, but now, with Russia forced to beg for Belarusian support, that illusion is crumbling. Both Russians and the international community see the cracks. Propaganda can only mask so much when the evidence is written in the destroyed tanks, the sunken ships, and the abandoned positions littered across the battlefield. Even within Russia, cracks are beginning to show. Reports of dissatisfaction within the military, complaints about poor supplies, and anger from the families of fallen soldiers paint a picture of a country struggling to keep its war effort alive. Each new Ukrainian victory deepens the crisis of confidence. And as Putin leans on Belarus, he signals to his own people that Russia cannot fight this war alone. Ukraine, for its part, has embraced the narrative of resistance and survival. Each victory, no matter how small, is amplified as proof that the aggressor can be beaten. The destruction of Russian assets and the steady pushback along the front lines serve as a powerful motivator, not just for Ukrainian soldiers, but for civilians enduring the hardships of war. Unlike Russia, Ukraine is fighting for its survival, its sovereignty, and its future, giving it a determination that Moscow cannot match. As the months drag on, the contrast between the two nations becomes ever clearer. Ukraine grows stronger, more united, and more technologically advanced, while Russia grows weaker, more isolated, and increasingly desperate. The decision to crawl to Belarus for help is not a strategy. It is a cry for survival. It reveals just how much Ukraine has taken from Russia, not only in terms of equipment and manpower, but in terms of pride, influence, and the aura of power that once surrounded the Kremlin. This war has reshaped the global order in ways that will be studied for decades. For Putin, what began as a bold gamble to restore Russian dominance has instead turned into a nightmare of attrition, humiliation, and dependency. For Ukraine, what began as a desperate struggle for survival has become a story of resilience and defiance that inspires the world. And as we look at the current state of affairs, one truth is undeniable. Ukraine has taken everything from Russia: its weapons, its ships, its soldiers, and now its dignity. Belarus may provide temporary relief for Putin, a place to regroup and reorganize, but it cannot reverse the tide of the war. The battlefield realities, the mounting losses, and the unwavering spirit of Ukraine will continue to grind down Russia's war effort. In the end, turning to Belarus is not a sign of strength but of weakness, and history will remember it as the moment when the Kremlin admitted, without words, that it could not stand on its own. And so, as this conflict continues, we are left watching a Russia diminished, a leader weakened, and an army stripped of its former glory. Ukraine has rewritten the narrative of this war, and in doing so, it has forced Putin to crawl to his last remaining ally, a move that lays bare the collapse of the empire he sought to rebuild.